Hey everybody, Hexlex here with some more Master Duel for you. So today's video is going to be a little bit different. In this video, I'm going to be talking less about a specific deck and more of just my general experience with Master Duel since it launched on the, was it the 18th? Is that right? So has it really already been almost 2 weeks since the game launched? That's kind of incredible. Yeah, and in that time, you know, as you've seen in my videos, I managed to make my way up to Platinum 1, which was a bit unexpected, to be quite honest. I was not intending to get as into the meta and just the game in general as I thought. Honestly, I was planning on being very casual going into this. I was like, well, it might be fun to play around, and like, I was going to build Domain Monarch, which is a very, not very casual deck, I guess, but it's not a very, it's a very rogue deck, let's say that. You know, with the intention of just playing around a bit, having fun, maybe for a day or two, and then just not coming back to it. But, yeah, I ended up pulling 2 Shurig, and that led me to build Tri-Brigade, and from there, I totally got sucked into it. So, from here, let's go ahead and take a look at the decks that I used at Platinum 1, and on my way to Platinum 1. Mostly Tri-Brigade Zodiac, I'd say about 90% of my games were with Tri-Brigade Zodiac. I'd say probably even closer to 95. Well, let's split the difference, we'll say like 92. And then the other 8% were with Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk, which I picked up relatively close to the end of the format, or not the format, the season here. I do have Sky Striker built, and I have been working on this deck. However, I've not used it in ranked at all yet. It's just not something I've gotten around to. Honestly, I've just been having too much fun with these other decks, but I do have some minor, literally 1-card updates to each deck that I'll go ahead and share with you as well. And I figure we can talk about the decks as well as my experience kind of at the same time, because I know people have been curious about the lists. I see it a lot in the comments. So anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead into the Tri-Brigade Zodiac. And just right off the bat, I'll go ahead and share my little 1-card update. Since making the Lyrilusk variant, I did end up crafting the Ancient Warrior's Oath Double Dragon, I believe it's called. Yeah. So we are going to take Hammer Kong out of our deck and go ahead and put this in the extra deck, even though it's kind of like fringe to make this card from what I understand. It's still a pretty decent play. Most of the effect isn't really relevant because it's related to Ancient Warriors cards, but we see right at the very end, it also has a quick effect where you can send a card from the hand or field to the graveyard and bounce one of your opponent's cards. And it doesn't, actually, yeah, that's not once per turn, is it? No, it is. Yeah, it says up here you can only use each of the effects. So it is once per turn, but it's still a fine effect, fine disruption effect. But as far as the main deck and the rest of the extra deck goes, I was extremely satisfied with this variant of Tri-Brigade Zodiac pretty much through and through. I will say that in a perfect world, I would have played 2 Nibiru and taken out 1 Ram and 1 Whiptail. I'm actually kind of thinking about like maybe dropping a Ram and a Whiptail, putting in a second Thoroughblade, and then finding another card for the main deck. I haven't really landed on what I would put in just yet, but and I do have the 60 Ultra Craft points, but I'm still not sure if we're going to see like a ban list of some kind when the season changes, or maybe something for Master Duel in the near future. So I'm just holding off on crafting things right now until we can land on that a little bit better. But yeah, as far as the main deck goes, I haven't really changed anything since my deck profile. I've been extremely satisfied with it. And honestly, one thing that I see a bit is that, oh, you know, do we have to play such an intensive Tier 1 deck to get Platinum 1? And the answer is that you don't. So my experience climbing up to Platinum 1, especially having climbed the ladder in other games like Hearthstone and Legends of Runeterra, is that in Master Duel, you really don't have to play as many games to reach Platinum 1 as you do to reach the top ranks in other card games. I kind of alluded to this in another video, but yeah, no, I think that this game is, I mean, it's not, I don't want to say it's like easy, as if anyone, you know, should be able to do it. You are still going to run into a lot of meta decks, especially the higher you get. As we all know, there's plenty of stun decks like Eldelich out there, mainly because they're not as intensive as like combo-based decks as far as like learning how to play the deck. That's not to say anything about the deck, you know, itself. It's still a fine, perfectly viable deck. But you definitely don't have to. The skill more comes from the timing of your effects, which is a bit easier to manage, I think, than, especially with something like Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk, like learning all the individual combos. But as we explored in my last video, sometimes just getting into those combos is all about just getting into the mindset of learning your cards individually, and then from there, figuring out how they can interact with each other. That is another tip, like, I guess, so to speak, that I have for laddering up to Platinum 1, is that it's really good to always, like, look at a hand and really just think hard about what we can do with it. There are often going to be times where we see a hand and it looks really bricky, and it's really easy to like, we'll just concede and go to the next game. Especially if you're already at Platinum 1, where, again, as we learned the hard way, it is possible to derank to Platinum 2. Sometimes you're at Platinum 1 and you're still kind of like, well, I probably have a few losses before I derank. I'll just go ahead and concede. This is a bad hand. But if we're trying to optimize our win rate, and this is mostly important for the climb up to Platinum 1, you really want to try to play out each game. Don't concede too early. Whether it's actually hitting the concede button, or surrender as it's actually called in the game, or like mentally conceding. I alluded to this in another video as well, the idea of mentally conceding. What I mean by that is, it's really easy to get behind, right at the start of the duel, or like I said, get a really bricky hand where you can't do much, and, think to ourselves, like, oh, like, this game is just gonna, like, I'll let it go on, I won't surrender, but I'm pretty much screwed. I'm kind of just clicking and watching my opponent do stuff, which, even if you don't have a response, you still want to be paying attention to what our opponent's doing, and actively trying to think of ways that we can get out of the situation. When we have a deck like Tri-Brigade Zodiac, I mean, we've seen in the combo video, it just takes one fractal to get play started. There are a lot of hands and a lot of decks where you can just top deck the right card and then all of a sudden you're good to go. The idea also applies if you get stopped by a hand trap early on. It's really easy, again, to get your fractal ashed and then you try to go for a Tenki for a backup play, and well, I guess that's kind of a bad example, but it's easy to get hit with 2 hand traps in a row and then just be like, well, now I can't do anything. Like what am I going to do? My opponent's going to combo next turn, I'll just concede. No, you should definitely pass it back to your opponent, because I mean, we've all had hands where we open like hand traps and then brick cards, and then we're kind of able to stop our opponent, but then we don't have a follow-up play, and then our opponent just plays a follow-up play of their own and we can't answer it. I feel like we've all had that game at least once. So, if let that game happen to your opponent is basically what I'm saying. Give your opponent the opportunity to potentially play out their bad hand if they have one. You never know until you play it out. That's another reason not to concede too early, is that, people are imperfect and we all misplay, and there's a very real chance your opponent could misplay in a combo, and even if things look hopeless, it might be enough of a misplay to turn things around. The extra time investment, I think, in my opinion, is worth it just to play out the game. It's not going to affect a huge amount of games in the grand scheme of things, sure, but I think it's enough. Let's see, I'm looking back to the deck specifically and thinking if there's anything I should talk about it. I mean, I've got the combo video, I've got the deck profile, I've got a lot of gameplay videos with this deck. Let's go ahead and take a peek at, oh yeah, we definitely want to save that change. Let's go ahead and take a peek at Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk, which I'm very still much in like the building process of this deck, so to speak. I know you're like, oh, you might be thinking, oh, well, you already built a deck profile on it. How could you still be modifying it? Well, when I put out a deck profile, that's definitely not intended to be like the final be-all, this is how you build this deck. Deck profiles are specifically just to show off the build that I'm using, and that's why I like to attach to gameplay videos too. So it's because I feel like a deck profile by itself, not to say this is true of other videos that only have a deck profile, I feel like a deck profile by itself does kind of present itself as like, this is the build of this deck that I recommend. But I kind of like to throw those gameplay videos in because I kind of have a more approach of like, yeah, here's this deck I've been using and here's some games with it. But as far as the change that I would make to my current build, and I haven't playtested this a whole lot just yet, but I'm thinking of taking out one Sparrow and adding one copy of Fire Formation Tenki, which I think I mentioned in the combo video. I was considering adding 1 or 2 copies of this card. Sparrow is a card that is good in our hand if we have like Warbler, but in often cases is not really necessarily something that can help us start a combo. Whereas getting it into the graveyard for a Warbler or a Barrel Canary is a little bit better at doing that. Fractal in general is really good for just starting up combos with this deck. Fractal plus a bird is often enough to unbrick or rather enough to have a playable hand. And that's why I like the Tenki, is to have more Fractal options to unbrick those hands. Now, as far as the extra deck goes, I haven't really made any changes to it. Like I said, I'm still very much in like the playing this deck, getting into the groove of it. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. Yeah, so the other thing that makes me want to put in a Tenki to get Fractal is that if we have absolutely no plays at all, Fractal by itself is actually still a viable play in this variant of, or rather with these amount of Tri-Brigade cards. We can still, if we have, again, no other plays at all, we can at the very least send Fractal, Fractal send Kit, Kit send Nerval, and then we can add like another Fractal, or, I mean, yeah, this scenario with like, let's say it was like Fractal Imperm called by Lightning Storm Feather Duster. That's our opening hand. We can Fractal, Fractal send Kit, Kit send Nerval, get another Fractal, summon Fractal, banish the 3. That lets us get our Simorg, which lets us summon our Apex Avian. So again, Fractal by itself is like still a pretty viable play, which is again why I added the copy of Tenki to this deck. That's another tip I have for laddering in general, is that your builds should be very malleable, right? We shouldn't just commit to one deck, and this is the only build I'm going to use because this is the build I found, or this is the build I'm committed to. I think we should be very open always to the option of possibly making changes to the deck while we're still laddering with it, even in Platinum 1 and on our way to Platinum 1. However, I would also say that there's, such a thing as too much of a good thing, right? We shouldn't be like, oh, I bricked this game, so I'm going to put more combo pieces in. Then the next game be like, oh, now I opened too many combo pieces. Let me take one out and put in another hand trap that I took out. You shouldn't be changing your build between every single game, right? We should be playing at least, I don't know. I don't want to give a specific number because I feel like it varies from person to person to know, to get into the groove of playing a deck and being like, okay, now I'm familiar with my list, and okay, now I know kind of what my options are just looking at my hand. That's kind of what I mean when I say I'm still learning this deck, is that I'm definitely close, I think, to being at the same comfort level with it as I am with Tri-Brigade Zodiac. Tri-Brigade Zodiac, I mean, again, I've done the vast majority of my climb with this deck, so I queue up with this deck and I am immediately, like, I look at my hand, I immediately know, okay, so based on what's in my hand and what's in my extra and what's left in my deck, I could do this, or this. Whereas Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk, I'm still kind of in the process of like, okay, so I'll do this, and this, and that'll let me get this, and then, okay, then I can go into that combo by doing this and this, I don't know if that makes any sense, really. Sometimes I feel like I'm rambling a bit, and this is one of those times, but suffice it to say, I am definitely far and away more comfortable with Tri-Brigade Zodiac at the moment than I am with Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk. Not that I'm uncomfortable with Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk, I'm just still not quite at the same level. I have also been considering building just a pure Zodiac deck and trying that, although from what I've seen, it just seems like the Tri-Brigade variant, I don't want to call it a strictly better version because obviously it's not. There's key differences between the two, and in various scenarios, one deck is always going to be better than the other. But the Tri-Brigade variant does just seem like it has more, it has more combo potential, and as a result, it has more options, which, generally speaking, the more options you have in terms of plays, the better off you are. So now that I've talked about the decks, I've talked a little bit about using the decks while laddering. I guess the only other really, two big tips I have for helping me ladder to Plat 1, and this isn't specific to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Like I said, I've played on the ladder of many other online card games, and the two biggest things that I find help me reach top rank in general are, one, just not succumbing to tilt. If you feel like you are tilting pretty hard, finish out the game you've got and then take a break. It's honestly the best thing you could do for yourself. maybe play another game for a bit, maybe go into like a duel room, or like solo mode for a little while, and then come back to ladder. Because if we like stay tilted going into the next game, we're just immediately putting ourselves at an unnecessary disadvantage. In a similar regard, I think that focusing is a very important aspect. I'm pointing at my temples as if I have a face cam. No, focusing is extremely important, and I often, admittedly, am guilty of, like, while I'm laddering, I'll have, like, a YouTube video in the background, or I'll be listening to a podcast, which some people can do that, right? Some people could listen to that kind of a thing and play the game and be able to focus, but me, personally, there is a point where they do distract me too much from the game, at which point I usually just like to switch to some music. I usually use, like, instrumental music without any like singing in it. I just find, again, that helps me concentrate a lot better than if I'm listening to just a regular playlist or something. So in that regard, I think that is honestly probably one of the most important things to take away, which of course it's like towards the end of the video, but is that it's all about our mentality. I've again touched on this in other videos, but mentality is so important, not only when playing the game, but just when building our decks, when even really thinking about the game. Even like mentality as far as like how we watch videos. Before I started playing any of these decks, I did my research. I went to YouTube, I went to search for deck lists, just even in Google sometimes. I would look at the subreddit, just looking up these decks and looking up variants and seeing. I always look at multiple builds. Right, you never want to just look at one deck profile or one deck list and be like, okay, I'll grab that one. No, we always want to be looking at multiple builds. And then comparing and contrasting, not only with our own collection what we can build, but also like, okay, what do I like from this build? What do I like from this build? You can kind of like take from multiple sources in that regard. So yeah, just having a good mentality in general in terms of focusing, not getting tilted, and doing your research, that's going to take you the further than any like other tip I could give you. And that, again, that does not just apply to Master Duel, that applies to like literally any online card game, really gaming in general. As long as you have a good focused mentality, where we're focusing on laddering, playing the number of games we need to get to the top, right? We don't have to have like an illustrious win rate. As long as it's above 50%, you will get there eventually. It's just a matter of playing the right amount of games. So I think that is just about going to do it for this video here. Again, this one was a little bit different. It was much more freeform than any of my other videos. We didn't talk about a specific deck. We didn't watch specific replays. We more just talked about the lists in whole, our experiences as a whole with the lists, and just the mentalities and other tips to get up to Platinum 1. So, as always, I really, really appreciate the viewership. I can never, ever stress enough how much it means to me. It really does, too. Like, it seriously is like made this year so far as I'm concerned. I mean that too. But in any case, that's all I've got for you today. This is Hexlex, signing out. Have a good one.